to be alive in this land of ours. Good to drive in this land of ours.
Hello, Canada hockey fans in the United States.
The Hockey Time Machine.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Hockey Time Machine. I'm Glenn Dreyfus. How is this for an ambitious project? 150 years of hockey stories. Writer and TV producer Don Weeks took on this daunting challenge in a new book, Hockey Hall of Fame, Timelines of the Game. Don, thank you for making time for us.
Oh, my pleasure. Anytime we can talk hockey, I'm there.
Don, even though you've written 30-some books, when you heard about this gargantuan assignment, narrowing 150 years between covers, why didn't you run away screaming?
Well, first of all, it was my idea. Okay, so that was easy to do. And it came like anything in life, you know, one thing typically leads to another. And I had written a book 2 years ago with a timeline in it. And I realized that this might make a good book idea for the 150th anniversary of the first outdoor organized game, which took place here in Montreal at the Victoria Skating Rink in 1875. So I was a victim of my own device, shall we say.
Speaking of not abandoning a pursuit, is this true that you once fell through the ice while playing pond hockey as a kid?
Absolutely. It wasn't playing hockey. It was skating on our back river where I grew up, Rivière de Prairie, just outside of Montreal. I grew up on a small island, and we learned how to skate as soon as we learned how to walk, and we learned how to swim as well because the river was everywhere around us. And one Thursday, Friday afternoon with my sister and a couple of friends, I just skated into this hole in the ice. Looked black, but it looked like ice. And through I went. And thanks to my sister, Karen, she rescued me. And it was serious. I mean, I could have like gone under and that might've been it, you know, because it was only a small area of ice that was, broken up.
So we should really thank Karen for this book happening as well.
Yeah, she saved me a number of times in a number of situations. So yes, she was the older sister, though, so that was her job.
Well, speaking of women, often what we remember most about a production is the beginning and the ending. And it's notable that the very first photo that you come across when you open the book cover is women hockey players, in this case, Team Canada in 2022, showing off its gold medals. What was the message behind choosing the image of women's hockey players to go first in your lineup?
That was a combination of my wish, because it was a mandate for us for the book to present the women's game as much as we could throughout the evolution of hockey. And it was a design idea that came from our graphic artist. But when I saw it, I said, yes, that's a must. And that only came at the very end after we had done so much about the women's game. We found some wonderful pictures, including one from, I think, 1910 in Alberta Women's League. There it is there. Isn't that terrific? They wearing skirts. And in somewhere, I don't know, about 10 years ago, I was speaking to a a woman who had played in the Maritimes, and she said to me that to keep their dresses down when they were skating, they put buckshot or gunshot, little BBs in the bottoms of their dresses to keep keep it weighted down.
They were weighted down, yeah.
And you know what? I had never heard of that before anywhere. It didn't make it in this book now, but it made it in the book that I was writing at the time. And of course, we did. We have terrific modern day shots of Hayley Wickenheiser, Hilary Knight, Marie-Philippe Poulet. They're all in there. And that was certainly one of the things that was top of mind for me when I was photo editing this book, that we had to cover the women's game well. So good observation for you.
And good on you for doing that, to give the women their due. And that's why Timeline of the Game is such a great title, because you show women playing in the 1910s and also in current day as well. And that's a theme of the book as well. And one last thing about the women's hockey, to come for full circle, the very last story in the book is titled Girl Power. So you really do the women's game justice.
Yeah, well, I had to think a couple of times whether girl power was still in vogue, was still something current, and it wasn't derogatory or in any way. And I'd seen it mentioned a couple of times in current publications, newspapers, magazines, and so on, and online. And I figured, okay, it still works. It's still solid. And, you bring up an interesting point about the women from 1910 to women today. That evolution follows throughout. That evolution of hockey follows throughout the book, because we tell it in chronological order. So you get a very good idea, not only of women, but obviously of all hockey, international hockey, NHL hockey, some minor leagues as well, of that evolution. And I had never told the game before in picture form. I mean, there is writing there accompanying, the story is the picture, but it's also what's behind the picture. So I'd never done it before this way. And even after as many books as I've written, hockey books that I've written, it still amazed me to see how it all happened, which is, the big story in itself. And you can't tell, because hockey is such a terrific story, you're never going to be able to do it better, as far as I'm concerned, than in picture form. And a picture is worth 1,000 words. So it really rings true.
Well, a picture is only worth about 150 of your words, Don, because you do good words. But
nice
I want
to
also mention that Girl Power is the last of a recurring category called Game Changers. Here's another example in which the topic is the Europeans. Why was having a category called Game Changer an important part of the book, Don? And how big were the fights, or about who made the Game Changer cut and who didn't?
For the most part, the fight was with myself. My graphic artist has done a number of hockey books before, but he wouldn't call himself a hockey expert. And the managing editor at Firefly Books knew a little bit less about hockey. So to some degree, it was mostly, as I said, arguing with myself, that internal editor in me, and going, okay, who's going to be a game changer here? And it deserves to be a book itself, because there are so many people and so many objects, so many buildings that deserve credit for bringing the game to what it is today. So it wasn't a huge battle, but I am guilty about leaving a number of people out. But the book is more to do with, I would have to say, how things changed. And I think, including 30 game changers was the right amount in a book this size.
All right, let's start down the timeline. The book, as you mentioned, is divided into 8 eras. and we'll speed read in each. The first is pre-1875, and you write, quote, hockey's lineage dated to numerous ancestral games. We're looking at an image from one of them. Don, in your research, is there debate about which game or games actually evolved into ice hockey?
Well, there are a number of games. There are 4 or 5 games that you could count. British field hockey, the Scottish game of shinty, the Irish game of hurley, and this indigenous game of what looks like lacrosse. Now, they all played a role, a significant role, and that dates to what most historians would agree today to the mid 1800s in Nova Scotia. And these games were played by military soldiers and by the locals. And it's what they knew of games played with sticks and balls. And when James Creighton came to Montreal, he was an engineer. He saw all these games being played in the 1860s. He came to Montreal and as an engineer to work on the Lachine Canal. And he introduced that, let's say, hybrid of a number of games here to McGill University students. And it was still a stick and ball game played on ice with skates. But I think the really interesting thing here is that when they played that first game in 1875 at Victoria Skating Rink, it was what it was called, a skating rink. So there were no boards to speak of, except maybe 3 or 4 inches, like a platform around the skating rink. And because they didn't want to literally hurt anyone with a ball because it bounced more, they decided to use a block of wood. And that really became the Canadian game, changing ball and stick game to a puck game with sticks. And that's kind of the embryonic stage of hockey as we know it. And it's quite fascinating that that's how it took place. And of course, because it was a skating rink, there was the inevitable fight afterwards, not with just the players, but with the skaters who were, upset about this game being played.
Well, let me stop you for a second, because I just want to read a quote. An 1860s newspaper rant. This is from the book. It said, hockey should be sternly forbidden. It is more than annoying to have graceful evolutions of figure skaters broken up by a disorderly mob armed with sticks.
Exactly. And that was the feeling then. And it went on, not just in the 1860s, but afterwards. And I think you pointed out at some point when we spoke pre-show here about how that kind of still exists today on ponds and rinks. So
the fight for ice time.
Yeah, that's right. We're always fighting for more ice time. It's never enough. But yeah, that's how the game evolved until 1875. I mean, it was a lot more complex. We know in the States that the word hockey was used a number of times in newspapers, but it was used sparingly. So kudos to hockey historians for finding all this other information. And it was a relatively hard first era to document because there's so much controversy among historians about how hockey happened. And it wasn't invented, not like a game like basketball, shall we say. It really evolved.
Era 2, 1875 to 1892, brings what you call hockey's first home. What place are you referring to?
As I said, it was Victoria's Skating Rink. It was a rink. It was bordered by a block in Montreal, downtown Montreal. Here's an image from 1893. It's a hybrid of photograph and painting produced by William Notman and Sons, a very familiar photographer to Canadians back then. And it shows the Montreal Victorias. You can see their jerseys and the winged wheel there. And you can see how the rink looked back then with the no boards and just like a platform around the rink, and all the bunting and other flags draped, and that's what seems to be a fairly accurate depiction of Victoria's skating rink. And that was hockey's really hockey's, well, it's debatable, but hockey's first home that took place here in Montreal.
You mentioned McGill University, and this photo is from 1881. I think the first time the coming together of hockey and photography. And I include this, Don, because the book, throughout the book, makes a great case that historic or brand new, still photos still reveal a side of the game that video that even our own eyes can't.
Well, yeah, that seems to make sense because, well, it does make sense because, you're looking at something for more than 2 or 3 or 4 seconds. You can look at that, and, when you look at that image, you can look at it for a longer period. When you look at that image, you can see they're wearing different skates, they're wearing different hats, they're wearing different jerseys, so and that's from the 1880s, and they even have different sticks. So I've been told that it's considered the earliest team photo on the ice, and they're not really playing there. They're all posed because photography hadn't developed enough to take, what fast action film can do today, stop motion. All those men are posed. They weren't moving for 3 or 4 seconds, whatever it was. So that's a truly important historic photograph. And McGill played such an important role in the development of the game, for sure. In fact, sorry to interrupt, they're the oldest hockey team in the world. So
and when they were the only hockey team, they had no one to play.
Yeah, well, originally, of course. I mean, you're dating back to the 1870s. That's right, and it was such a different game. I think they played in that time 9 men aside. So you can imagine the chaos on a slightly smaller rink than what we know today. No wonder skaters were scared of of players and what might happen.
Era 3, 1893 to 1917, a time of, you write, quote, setting standards over money and morality, and at times failing miserably. What were you getting at, Don?
Well, it was a time of the athletic wars, what were called the athletic wars. The game originally, isn't that a great shot of excuse me for interrupting, but a great shot of Cyclone Taylor. It was a time of the athletic wars. The game originally was an amateur game. And as soon as it became more and more popular with more things at stake, more money at stake, the game soon turned professional. Not soon, but it took a number of years. And the Stanley Cup had a huge influence there in this era because, there were wealthy men who wanted to win the Stanley Cup. So they would, create teams and create leagues just to win the cup. And that was a time when the Stanley Cup was a challenge trophy. In other words, it wasn't owned by any one league like it is today, like the NHL owns it. It was a trophy, independent trophy that any league, any team could challenge. And it had trustees who would agree to these challenges. So again, the game evolved that way. The biggest influence was probably, among a few things, the Stanley Cup.
And the game was growing. It wasn't anymore just a Quebec or Ontario sport. That year of 1893, one report cites, quote, a wave of hockey that rolled over the North and West like a flood. This is an image of the Winnipeg Victorias. So, Don, it's fair to say that a growth spurt for the sport of hockey was happening across Canada.
Oh, definitely. I think there's some statistics of when it came to Toronto in 1889, 1890 from Montreal. It had already been in Ottawa. It had already been in Quebec City. And in Toronto, within, let's say, a decade, there were more hockey teams playing at every level, from the senior all the way down to, kids games, than any other clubs, sporting clubs in Toronto. So it had a massive appeal immediately. I think a lot of that had to do with the speed of the game. You have to remember, but that back then, the speed was, the fastest anyone went might be in a train or on horse. So when you went enclosed into a building with 3 or 4 or 5,000 other people in hockey's old barns, you would see these men flying around the ice, and it was something to watch. And all the aggression that was involved in the game, the speed, it really did literally take off. And that shot of the Winnipeg Victorias from 1896, they won the cup that year. And that was really the beginning. I mean, there were perhaps earlier confrontations, but the beginnings of the East-West confrontations between Montreal, Toronto, Ottawa, and Winnipeg teams. And of course, then, there's many stories about the interior British Columbia having teams. And we already saw in 1910, the women's game was in Alberta. So it happened very quickly over a number of decade or two.
And giving hockey south of the border its due, Don, tell us why the Portage Lake, Michigan club of 1903-04 is important to hockey history.
Well, that's really important, and that dates to that year. And a few years earlier, there was an Ontario-born player by the name of Doc Gibson, and he ended up moving to Michigan, started a team called the Portage Lakes, and started a league called the International Hockey League. And all the money that the team received for playing various other teams, including teams like the Montreal Victorias, all the gate would go to the players themselves. Doc Gibson, he's very important because he's today known as the father of professional hockey. And you can see him there in the oval image, which is again from that 1903-1904 image of the Portage Lakes. And from then on, the game changed. And it was a very interesting time because amateurs and professionals, sometimes they would play together on the same teams. Players were often discriminated against in newspapers and so on for playing professional hockey. They would change their name. They would play on both amateur and professional teams, and they would change their name when they went on to one team or another team, just so that they weren't recognized as either being professional. They weren't recognized as being professional. So it was a really, there was a lot of animosity at that time. And a lot of that had to do with the OHL, or the OHA, I should say, that was strictly an amateur organization at that point.
Here's how bright Jack Doc Gibson was. Doc, because he was a dentist as well as a hockey player. Now that's smart thinking.
That is, you're playing with the people that you're going to have as clients. Absolutely,
you're creating business as you go along.
That's right. That's right. He moved from Ontario to Michigan, and there's an interesting story in that they were he and his team were given gold watches, I think, or gold nuggets for winning a championship. And they had to return them because the league wouldn't allow them to receive any kind of monies for winning. And he never forgot that. And that's one of the reasons why he started the IHL and Portage Lakes teams and professional game and the professional game.
And I'll look forward to your timeline of dentistry book, which you haven't started on yet. But another game changer, Frank Calder. The AHL names its trophy the Calder Cup, and the NHL Rookie of the Year is annually awarded the Calder Trophy. Calder himself was the NHL's first president. He was unquestionably a monumental figure. He served for 25 years. He was a hero in many quarters, a villain in others. How do you, Don, assess Frank Calder's legacy?
Well, I think he was the right man for the right time. And you have to look at the pluses and minuses of his career to, I guess, try and take an objective view of it. He did everything that he needed to do, that he had to do, shall I say, for the NHL when he took over in 1917 and the NHL was founded. It was back then it was a 4-team league, and within a couple of weeks into the first season, it became a 3-team league with Westmount Arena burning down, and he made a big difference in sticking around, creating new teams, including in Hamilton, the Hamilton Tigers, and as well at the same time he realized he had very little sentimental value for small market teams like in Ottawa and Hamilton, and also out west. So to create a league, an international league, to go into the United States, he had to do everything he can to monopolize professional hockey. And he did that by creating new teams in New York, Chicago, and Detroit, and eliminating teams out west in Calgary and Vancouver and so on, and in Ottawa. So when you look at it, he had little value for small market teams. It was a business. Hockey was a business, or hockey was a game, and I guess the NHL was a business. And he looked at it that way, and that was crucial for the development of the league. And what he did is he codified rules. He created feeder leagues like the AHL to supply players to the NHL level. And he ratified streaming services. So there was a lot that he did to create it. It's not the game back then, or the league back then wasn't like it is today, where all of that is established. So, he made it happen until the early 40s. No, he deserves all the trophies and all the awards named after him, for sure.
Era 4, 1917 to 1942. And later on, we're going to show a 2-page spread within the book to give you a visual idea. But timeline of the game has an element of a treasure hunt where your eyes go left and right and up and down each page. And you kind of, with your eyes, collect gems for your basket, so to speak. Another recurring heading is rule changes. When goalies could first drop to the ice, the introduction of the blue line, 6 men aside instead of 7 or 9, offside, forward passing. And my personal favorite, Don, you have to tell the story of how the icing rule came to be.
Okay, that's a great little story, and I only found out about it working on this book. Reportedly, it involved the New York Americans when they were still playing up until the 40s. But in 1931, in a December game, the Americans decided that they were going to ice the puck. In other words, get rid of the puck in their own zone when there was too much pressure on them in their zone. And knowing since there was no icing rule back then, it made for very boring hockey because, they just cleared the puck out of their zone and they weren't called back on it. They weren't called on that because of the ice. There was no icing rule. This happened in that December game, 1931 game, 61 times I've read. And so you can imagine how boring that is, that the play continued on, and it simply became something that a tactic that they used to get out of their zone. Charles Adams, of the owner of the Boston Bruins, petitioned Frank Calder and asked him to create an icing rule, like our modern day rule, where a team, if you ice a puck, it's taken back into your zone for that reason. And Frank Calder listened to that, and he said, no, we're not going to do that. He didn't see the point in it, or for whatever reason. So when the Bruins came back to play the Americans the next time, they did the same thing in return and iced the puck approximately 87 times. And the kicker to the story is that it took Calder another 6 years before the NHL implemented the icing rule.
83 icings by one team. Now that's entertainment.
Yeah. On slushy ice.
An early hockey superstar, Howie Morenz, he dies after an on-ice collision in 1937. And there is a remarkable photo in the book of his memorial service. It was at the Montreal Forum, a public funeral, and you write that there were 15,000 mourners, while another 250,000 jammed the streets outside the arena. And what that says to me, Don, is the level of passion felt for these hockey heroes was incredible.
Yeah, I don't think it's any different than today, though. The numbers vary from one report to the other, but you can see there that with a capacity of 15,000, that it was filled. And Morenz was loved throughout Quebec, and well, he played a huge part in the development of the NHL. And Frank Calder was very lucky to have him as a player. He was hockey's first superstar, or the NHL's first superstar. And the league, when he entered the league in 1924, it was a 4-team league, and 3 years later it was a 10-team international league. So he had a huge impact, and I think it was not only him as a star, as an icon, as someone that Montrealers, hockey fans in general, could gravitate to. It was also how it happened. He had an accident. He fell on the ice and went into hospital for a week or 2 weeks, or maybe a little bit longer, and died suddenly of a heart deficiency, or cardiac deficiency, I think was the official term that they used. So it was a combination of the man himself, the shock of his death, and it was really an era was over when he passed.
Speaking of errors, not ERRORS, but ERA,
Yes.
Era 5, 1942 to 1967. And you write, fans argued endlessly who was better, Rocket Richard, the pure goal scorer, or Gordie Howe, the game's most complete player. We're looking at a shot of Howe's production line in Detroit, Sid Abel and Ted Lindsay alongside. Would you like to weigh in on the Mr. Hockey versus the Rocket debate?
No. No, I think you said it perfectly, that it was a pure goal scorer in Richard versus the most complete player in Howe, and it's something that you could compare to today with Ovechkin, with Alexander Ovechkin and Sidney Crosby. I mean, can you say that one is better and another? Can you list their trophies and say that this tells you that one is better than the other? I don't think there's any way of really quantifying it. It's really, two game superstars who moved the game, advanced the game, and for the love of the game, made it so much better. And there's nothing wrong with the controversy over who's better. It's just, I would look at it as a point that they both did in their own way.
Well, here's where I come down on Sid versus Ovi, and you tell me if I'm paddling with both oars here. I think Crosby is the more complete player, and he has more of the team trophies to show it. I think Ovechkin was better for the game of hockey as a personality, as someone who showed unbridled joy in what he was doing and brought along the casual fan. How does that sound?
That sounds really good. I mean, they both moved the game forward in America. They're both, especially Sidney Crosby is loved here in Canada for his international play. And I think that, you can't say enough about someone who breaks Wayne Gretzky record. Wayne left the game with 60 odd records, and this probably could be his biggest one. And no one ever thought that it would be broken. It was an unbroken record. And I wrote about it in previous books that it was unbreakable. And yet here we are. He's still playing at the age of 40, a bull on the ice. And, he game in, game out, he takes no prisoners. So, you can't say enough about both those players.
And both of them are represented in their appropriate era in the book. But I want to go from two players everybody knows to a player that was excellent, but few people know, and that was Bill Dernan. He's not a well-known name, but a fascinating player, Don. Didn't even reach the NHL with Montreal until age 27. He was the last goalie to be allowed to be a team captain. He was ambidextrous, a Hall of Famer who allowed the fewest goals in the league 6 times in his 7 seasons. And he makes your book smoking a cigarette in uniform, which he did constantly between periods, a symptom of the unbelievable stress he felt. I was wondering if it was a battle getting this photo included in the book.
No, it wasn't. I have to give credit to the Hockey Hall of Fame, to Phil Pritchard, Craig Campbell, Kevin Shea, for all of their efforts, not only in this book, but in previous books, at helping find these kinds of images. And when I picked this image, I was a little bit curious to see if any of them would say, well, this is one that, we really don't want you to use. But there was nothing like that. There was no really editorializing that they did on the images that we could and couldn't use. And I think that's special with being able to have editorial control over in this kind of book. I haven't seen this picture before in other books, and I thought it deserved attention. Particularly, it says so much about that maskless era of hockey, in that goalies didn't wear masks, but the equipment was far different. They didn't have goalie coaches. The coaches of the day, there was only one behind the bench, and most of them would say, well, we know nothing about goaltending. So they were literally on their own, except for their own peers. And I think this shows off very well the stresses that he was under. In fact, one of the more interesting things is, after such a stellar career, he left the game in mid-playoffs. If you can imagine that today happening, finishing your career off by not finishing a playoff, it's quite remarkable. So, every game, it was a struggle, I guess, to go through. especially with, without a mask on and all that protective equipment that they didn't have back then.
Since you mentioned the Hockey Hall of Fame, tell us what the Hall's part in this book was.
Well, I wrote that they are really the backbone of this book. It's very difficult to produce a book like this with over 600 images and not incur a lot of cost. It's very labor and capital intensive, shall I say. And the Hockey Hall of Fame supplied, I'm sure, 60 to 70% of the images. So everything that you see from the 1890s up to the year 2000, I would say 60 to 70% of those are the Hockey Hall of Fame. So it would not have been possible without Craig and Phil and Shay, Kevin's help on this to supply the images. So it was really a carte blanche that they had. There was no objection anywhere. So it makes for a much better book when you have, you can contribute the kinds of images like that last one we saw of Durnan.
How is this for an odd couple? The Beehive Corn Syrup Company and Hockey Night in Canada. How did corn syrup and TV both grow the game in this era?
Well, I think television is a game changer, and I think it's obvious why. I mean, for the first time, people could sit in their living rooms and watch hockey. Now, at the beginning, of course, in the 50s and the 60s, in Canada at least, you only saw parts of the second period and the third period because there was a lot of angst over the fact that if people were going to watch the game at home, they wouldn't attend it in arenas. And of course, that was not true. It's proven to be not true. And so television was a real game changer. And I would say is as important as the internet is today. So it forwarded the game that way, bringing it into people's homes. Beehive corn syrup is interesting in that it's probably the best marketed giveaway ever in Canadian history. It started in the 30s and ran to the I think the late 60s, where they gave away what was called hockey portraits. And if you can imagine back in the 40s or 50s, there weren't a lot of places where you could get a picture of your favorite player, of a player, except in cards and in newspapers and so on, or unless you were at a game and you're able to take a picture. So Beehive Corn Syrup decided that with a proof of purchase, you mailed it in and they would send you hockey portraits. And at its height, 2,500 portraits to 2,500 people were sent out every day. So it was a really big deal. And I think if anyone, even from our era, before our era, will remember that as being something that generated a lot of interest. The other point is that, when kids like all-stars like Bobby Hull were growing up as kids, Beehive Corn Syrup got them more interested in hockey as well. So it really played, a small but important part of that evolution of hockey.
By the way, Don, this is exactly what I looked like as a child. I was quite a precocious lad.
With hair.
So on to something more important, which is I promised to show everyone a typical double-page layout of the book, which on top of everything else, the book is aesthetically beautiful. Before we talk about the guy on the right, Ted Lindsay, would you like to spend a moment talking about the book's layout?
Well, sure. I think one of the important things for me was to have the graphic designer, Gareth Lind, who did the design, on board. When I spoke to Firefly Books about doing this project, I said, he's the guy that I want to work with. I've worked with him in the past. He's done many hockey books before. So, we had to have a really good connection with each other to carry this through. I would find multiple pictures. I would write the copy or the text here, and then I would, he would take it over and come up with various designs. And when I was looking through the book the other day in preparation for this interview, I realized that almost every page is a little bit different in some way. So you have on that page spread, that 2-page spread, you have 4 or 5 images. 1, 2, 3. Yeah, you have 4 images. Plus you have a stat box at the bottom left. And in some page spreads, you'll have 6 or 7 or 8. So it was really, as I said, labor intensive in every page spread. And there was some back and forth, not a lot, but some back and forth as to whether the image was the right size or not. And you can just see from this one, what I liked about this image or this page spread was that in the bottom middle there, you'll see Stan Mikita planing his bent stick, his curved blade, which was, became very popular in the early 60s.
Don, that is one well-dressed carpenter.
Absolutely. He knew how to do well. That's how they all dressed at that point, of course. Above that, you can see Lou Fontinato taking out a player. And then, of course, next to him, the first hockey player in Sports Illustrated was Jean Beliveau. And then, what you had mentioned before, the importance of a guy like Ted Lindsay and what he did for the game beyond being a multiple Stanley Cup winner, a player who competed at the highest level. He was also the main person to start the first Players Association, which took all the managers of the league by complete surprise. He and Doug Harvey, they signed up all the players in secrecy because, this was a time when player salaries were stagnant. They didn't have control over their or weren't allowed to keep their contracts or their pension ledgers. Nothing like that. There was no streaming services of any sort, revenue streaming sorts or little revenue streaming sorts of any kind. And he saw how unfair this was to the game. And it didn't take a smart player to, step on the ice, see 15,000 people sitting around, and how much each one had to pay to see the game, to realize that, maybe the players weren't getting their fair share. So he started the first Players Association, and just through lethargy, team intransigence, it folded within the first year. They never got off the ground, but it led to the Players Association that we know of later in 1967. So he was fundamental in evolving the game.
Long after the two immortals retired, you tried to broker a meeting between Lindsay and Richard. And when I read the story, I thought Lindsay came out looking better than the Rocket, but I'm not sure you agree. How come?
Well, that was in my television days, which ended about 12 years ago. And I was producing and directing a documentary on the Canadians moving from the Forum to what was then the Molson Center, now the Bell Center. And I thought about a year before the move that this would make a good documentary. And we lined up, 20 or 30 of the best players of that era in the 90s and also before that. So we brought Red Kelly in, we brought Ted Lindsay in, a number of retired players, including Bobby Hull. Ken Dryden was there. It was hosted by Jean Beliveau. So we were very rich in players. And on the second day of our interviews that we did down at the old Forum, scheduled that afternoon, just by happenstance was Maurice Richard and Ted Lindsay. Ted Lindsay came first in the mix of several other players. And after the interview with Ron Roush, he asked me, he said, listen, I understand that Maurice Richard is going to be talking. I'd like to talk to him. I'd like to meet him. And of course, if you know your history of that era, they were sworn enemies. That's nothing new. It was like that with most players, most opponents on teams. And when Lindsay asked me this, I said, sure, I will ask him. Let's see what how he responds. So when I met up with Maurice Richard, we were about to enter the President's Lounge where we were doing the interviews, and Lindsay was off to one side. And I said to Richard, I said, Ted Lindsay is here. He would like to meet you and say hello. And I wanted to know if you were agreeable to that. And Richard had just been through, because the forum was closing, it was a huge deal. Richard had been through several interviews already and only wanted to give us 5 minutes or 10 minutes. And because of his fatigue, I could only assume, he said no, that he preferred to just do the interview. So Richard and I walked by Lindsay within 10 feet, and I just sort of shook my head just ever so slightly at Lindsay to sort of indicate it's not going to be possible today. It goes to show you just, how important a player Ted Lindsay was, that when he entered the Montreal Forum, the reverence that he still gave to Maurice Richard, and he didn't approach him at all based on, my suggestion at that time when we were going in the room. So it really struck me that how that game was once played and the reverence, the authority that Richard had with other players.
Era 6, 1967-1993 is titled A New Hockey Order. And didn't you miss an opportunity here, Don? Shouldn't it have been a new hockey ORR, DER?
Yeah, we should have put another R in the order. You're right, and put a hyphen after that. You should have been my editor, my managing editor on this. I love this image of war. It's not a Hockey Hall of Fame image, and they have plenty of terrific images, but we went out and found the right shot. I think it just captures everything about the player. He's not only a great defenseman and a great rusher and a great scorer, but he had a mean streak, and that little knob on his nose, that little scab there, it really speaks to what a compete player was. Not a complete, he was a complete player, but how much he competed, and he was a fierce hockey player on the ice. And I'm not sure if I remember what your question was, but you're right. He dominated this era, and if I had to come out and say the greatest player of all time, it would probably be Orr.
And as seen in the book, there's more than one shot of Bobby flying through the air. The book includes the more famous one too. But when you consider Orr's legacy, 60 years later, you put him at the very, very top.
Of course, I think that, again, it's a kind of a Crosby, Ovechkin, or Richard or Howe scenario, but you have to say something that's very special about a defenseman winning the scoring title and what he did. The team had obviously something to do with it, and you can't take anything away from Wayne Gretzky for everything that he did. I have no argument there. But Orr was, I think, something else special. He was a legend in his time. He was in a league of his own, and you have to say that the Boston Stanley Cups had so much to do with him, as did other players like even tough guys like Ted Green and Phil Esposito and Derek Sanderson. But yeah, I think that, that other picture that you're talking about, the 1970 Stanley Cup winner, built on that. It left an indelible mark on everyone, because today it's still the most recognizable, durable hockey image that we have.
This book, we should point out, goes far beyond the NHL. Like this incredible shot from the 1969 World Championship. What's going on here, Don?
Well, yeah, this, there's a good story behind this, and I don't want to bore you, but this took me 2 months to find. It's Czechoslovakia winning the World Championships against the Soviet Union. And if you know a bit about political history in Europe, in 1968, the Soviet Union invaded Czechoslovakia for a number of reasons. And, Czechoslovakia acquiesced. They had to acquiesce to the Soviets' invasion, but not on the ice. And the Czechs won 2 games against the Soviets. And in this remarkable image, it shows players who are just ecstatic over defeating them on the ice, which was the only place that they could do at that time. I petitioned dozens and dozens of people in North America here and in Europe as to who owned the rights to this image. I wasn't going to give up on it because we wanted it. We had to not only get the rights, but we had to get a high resolution image of it for the book. And I did a shotgun effect where I sent out to 20 different places, everybody that I could find in Europe. And eventually someone came forward who owned the rights and had the high resolution imagery. And I'm so happy that it's in the book and that you've asked about this particular image.
It's interesting that you know at a far earlier point in the book that teams from Montreal and Quebec City have been battling it out on the ice on and off for more than a century, but never more fiercely than what's come to be known as the Good Friday Massacre in 1984. Has hockey ever had a rivalry quite like the Battle of Quebec?
Oh, I'm sure Toronto fans, Edmonton, Calgary fans would all have a say in this. And I'm not going to say that this was any more fierce, but I think it started in the second period. The referees lost control of it. It came back in the third period. It continued again. I can't remember the exact number of penalty minutes, but it was a near record of a couple of hundred minutes in penalties handed out. This is a terrific picture from the Hockey Hall of Fame. And, I have to say that it's a shame that we don't have a team in Quebec City to have this rivalry again. It's I think a great disservice to the game of hockey, particularly in Quebec. I don't think that the rivalry would be any less today than it was back in this era in the 80s.
Well, my theory on that is the only way Quebec City, and I agree with you, they deserve a team. The way they're going to get one is if they can put another expansion team like they're talking about in Atlanta, because the first one went to Calgary and the second one went to Winnipeg. So after the third one fails in Atlanta, they can relocate it to Quebec City.
There you go. Well, I think that's the only way that they would get a franchise would be a relocation, because the amount of money that they're asking for now and will be asking for is just too high. And Winnipeg got their Jets back, and it was at a very good price. I think it was under $200 million. So I think that's needed in Quebec. They have a world-class arena there just waiting for it, and they have the fan base. And now it's a question of when, I guess.
there's so much packed into timelines of the game. We're not even going to devote time to the Summit Series or the USA Miracle on Ice, but get the book because they're in there. However, we can't leave out number 99. Of all the images of Wayne Gretzky, why did this one appeal to you?
Well, I like images that are ice level. I think the further, like in any sport, the further you are away from the game being played, takes away from the impact, takes away from the speed, takes away from the emotion of the game. And I like this shot because it's right at the bench, and you see that, you know, even though his body is positioned the other way, he's looking back, so you see his face. It's in profile, but it's very clearly him, and that so distinctive jersey, Gretzky 99, just pops right out at you. And it's just a wonderful photograph. And there are obviously hundreds of them in many books, but and available. But this one in particular, I think, really stands out. It shows a competitiveness side of him that I think deserves its attention.
Era 7, 1993-2005 is titled A World Game. One of those I want to focus on is Mats Sundin. There's another photo of Sundin. Considering how much he ended up meaning to the Maple Leafs, people might forget how unpopular was the 1994 trade that sent another hero of the Leaf Nation, Wendell Clark, to the Nordiques.
Yeah, it was hugely unpopular for Toronto's fan base. They got rewarded in Sundin, certainly. He had much more. He had a greater longevity and stayed with the team for more than a decade. It shows off. This picture shows off his speed, and it really was something. Another image that I felt had to be in the book, and he deserves that attention. I like the boards behind him. They look like speed lines, and anyway, the Wendell Clark trade was. I think it was well received in Quebec. And I remember when I was working with Dick Irvin's Hockey Magazine, we went up to Quebec City to interview him. And not unlike a lot of players, but some players perhaps, in this case, or like many players, he really relished going to another team and hats off to a Quebec team. And, when you go to Quebec City from Toronto, or from any other English team, it's a culture shift, and it's a population that lives in French, and it is quite different. It's as passionate as they are about the game in Quebec City, and he was really very well received. But I think they got the short end of the stick for sure. If that for Sundin.
Yeah, I think Clark just stayed in Quebec City for one season. But let's move on to Era 8, 2005 to 2025. It's titled The Next Big Thing. And what I want to focus on right now is you've been seeing for yourself, everybody watching, that the photography by this point is spectacular. But that's never brought home better than a 3-image sequence from the final of the 2022 World Junior Championship. Don, I'm going to show these 3 photos that you have so generously shared with us in sequence. And I want you to tell us what appeals to you about the sequence.
Well, I don't remember the goal watching it, but when I saw it available from the Hockey Hall of Fame, I went, "Oh, this has to be in the book." And I think it's the drama of the overhead shot. You really have a terrific sense of player movement, of where they are. And here's the second shot in the sequence where you can just see the puck is at the edge of the stick, I believe. And the Finnish team
This is Kent Johnson, by the way, scoring
Yeah.
the gold medal overtime goal for Team Canada against Finland.
Right. You can see the Finnish players trying to move in. You see on the lower right-hand side where Johnson's teammate is blocking the Finnish player from a defender from moving in. And I think this is probably the kicker. I actually laughed out loud when I saw this. It's every player's nightmare to lose a game this way, or a championship game this way. The sticks are on the ground, their heads are buried into the ice. You can't help but love this sequence. And again, it's from such a dramatic angle that I think no other image would do this sequence justice.
Also from the overhead view, Connor McDavid. What are we seeing here?
Well, this is another shot, and we put this at the beginning of the book that kind of complemented what we saw, what you showed at the very beginning of the 2022 women's team, and we used this image to give a sense of what's in the book, using it as as an index. And this is McDavid celebrating another goal against the Finns, and it's really the drama of the sequence. One of the things that surprised me, and perhaps naively surprised me, was how good the international or the world game images were. And I went year through year, dating back to the 70s and the 80s, well, earlier as well, for the championships, the men's world championships. But I was quite taken back by how well that game was photographed, and equally so the NHL game. But I think the net cam shots that we have in the book, these over the head shots of the world game, particularly impressed me with their photography.
Well, that was a great segue, because the next photo I'm going to show is a net cam shot. There are several photos in the book that document the ongoing and sensational tug of war for women's hockey supremacy between the USA and Canada. This is just one of many shots from that rivalry. Canada winning the 2012 World Championship in overtime 5-4. Probably because women's hockey, though it's catching up, has not grown as much or as quickly overseas as it has in North America. Team USA and Team Canada, the women's game, also is a rivalry unlike any other.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it's a limited rivalry because it's really still in its early stages of being between America and between Team USA and Team Canada. But this shot is a perfect example. I mean, you see the puck still in the air, and that's always a little bit of magic in a photograph when you see a puck in the air caught that way, because it's just that moment in time that is so perfect. And I think that I believe the goaltender is Molly Strausser. I think that's how you pronounce her name. And on the number 22 is Haley Wickenheiser. And it's just really shows that American-Canadian game and the rivalry that has really moved women's hockey along. So these kinds of images were crucial to having in the book.
What a journey. As we've raced through 150 years of hockey stories, trust me, we have barely scratched the surface. So, Don, tell everyone, please, where they can get a hold of a copy of Timelines of the Game.
It's available in bookstores. It's available through Amazon. You type in the title, and it's available there. I think that anywhere fine books are sold, you'll be able to get a copy. It's a good price for at $29.95. I don't mean to plug it this way, but it's a good price for over 650 images. And you're right. We've barely scratched the surface of what's inside the book, and it's just one page turner after another.
Oh man! Oh, the other stuff I left out, even in the list of questions I had for you, I had to cut some because of time. But it's just great stuff. And I'll close, Don, with this. I only want to correct you about one thing. You write, fans go through their own kind of physical experience of spectating without getting shiners or bruised. Well, decades ago, my sister Dana and I were at a Washington Capitals game. When she got so excited, she banged her elbow on the armrest. And after the game, we had to stop at a fast food restaurant to get ice for her injury. So don't tell me fans don't give up their bodies just like the players. Good point.
Well, get some padding under the armrests for the next time, I guess.
We suffer as fans. We suffer.
Mentally, certainly we do. It's a cruel game that way. Absolutely. You wait years and years for a championship, and it can be taken away at you with the blink of an eye.
That's why players will say they get more nervous watching because they can't do anything about it.
That's right. Absolutely. It's like, we're best playing on the ice, except we don't have their game skills, their nerve.
Don, this was a tour de force and really does a daunting topic justice. You should be justly proud. What an accomplishment for you, Don. Any idea how you follow up 150 years of hockey history for yourself?
I do have an idea, but I don't know if it's going to follow up or if it's going to fall down, actually. So okay. I'll keep that to myself for the moment, but thank you very much for those generous and kind words. That's part of what it's all about, seeing other hockey fans like your work. It's crucial.
Well deserved. And again, many thanks for taking the time to take us along on this journey. We certainly appreciate it.
Well, thank you very much for having me again.